Hi, I'm Tucker, and today I've got 6 Karens who messed with the absolute wrong people and got a first-hand lesson in instant karma. From a violent Karen who grabbed the wrong nurse, to an agent Karen who picked a fight over a measly $12 and spent her last moments desperately trying to delete the evidence. It was March 3rd, 2014. Rain fell steadily across Jersey City as ambulances arrived one after another at the emergency department. A major interstate crash had filled nearly every treatment room. The waiting area was crowded, and the staff was struggling to keep pace with demand. One of the patients that day was 55-year-old Gloria Haynes, an office administrator who worked at a regional insurance company. Friends described her as outspoken, stubborn, and someone who hated waiting for anything. If a service was delayed or a problem wasn't fixed immediately, Gloria wasn't afraid to make her frustration known. Gloria had a painful infection on her lower leg that had been getting worse for days. The swelling made it difficult to walk, and by that evening she finally decided to go to the emergency room. Unfortunately for Gloria, she arrived during one of the busiest nights the hospital had seen in months. A major car crash had sent multiple critical patients into the ER, forcing staff to prioritize life-threatening injuries first. Gloria's condition required treatment, but it wasn't considered an emergency. Because of the influx of critical car crash victims, Gloria faced a long wait and did not handle it well at all. While I get that being in an ER with a painful infection is incredibly stressful, she completely lost me when she spent hours badgering the staff. Witnesses said Gloria was screaming, ripping off monitoring wires, and threatening to get nurses fired. Several staff members attempted to calm her down, but the situation only continued escalating. One of the nurses assigned to her room was 42-year-old Vivian Davis, a veteran ER nurse with nearly 2 decades of trauma experience. Co-workers described Vivian as exceptionally calm under pressure. She was also a black belt in judo, though few people in the department ever thought about that fact because she rarely mentioned it. Around midnight, a physician assistant arrived to clean the wound. The discomfort caused Gloria to demand narcotics. The PA explained that it required a doctor's approval and stepped out to review her chart, leaving Vivian behind near a stainless steel treatment cart holding dressings and basic medical supplies. However, witnesses said that Gloria suddenly sat upright, screaming, and as Vivian stepped closer to calm her, Gloria snapped. She lunged forward, grabbed Vivian's scrub top with both hands, and violently yanked the nurse across the bedside. And that's when Vivian's judo training kicked in completely on instinct. She used a basic defensive move just to break the grip and get some distance, and witnesses said it was totally controlled, a split-second reaction. But Gloria already had so much momentum that she flew halfway off the bed. Her foot caught the lower rail, twisting her body awkwardly, and she crashed into the metal instrument cart. The cart flipped onto its side, and the side of Gloria's head struck the reinforced metal frame before she slammed onto the floor. Staff rushed in after hearing the crash. Gloria was conscious at first, but quickly deteriorated. Scans revealed severe bleeding inside her skull, and despite emergency surgery, she died the following morning. The medical examiner determined that the impact caused a skull fracture and a massive subdural hematoma. Despite aggressive treatment, Gloria's neurological condition continued deteriorating over the next several hours. She was pronounced dead the following morning. An investigation cleared Vivian of wrongdoing. Security footage and witnesses confirmed she acted in self-defense. Afterward, the hospital revised its policies on room equipment placement and staff training for combative patients. The hardest part is that Gloria's condition wasn't life-threatening, but her own actions ultimately cost her life. The next case did the exact opposite and turned a neighborhood annoyance into a full-blown obsession. It was just before 11 p.m. on a warm June night in 2015 in Sherwood, Oregon. The quiet neighborhood was settling down for the night, with porch lights switching off and the gentle evening hum of honeybees fading as they returned to their hives. One of the residents was a 52-year-old Marcy Bell. She had moved in from Portland a couple of years prior and immediately started treating every minor neighborhood dispute like a full-time job. We're talking constant complaints about lawns, parking, landscaping, you name it. She had a problem with it. She was just one of those people who completely struggled to let things go, and her absolute fixation became her neighbor's beehives. That neighbor was 68-year-old Arthur Clark, a retired entomology teacher known for donating honey from his licensed backyard hives to local school science programs. When Marcy started targeting the hives, Arthur cooperated with inspections and even moved them farther from her fence to avoid conflict. Every inspection found the bees healthy and safely managed, but Marcy kept filing complaints claiming they were attacking children. Investigators found no evidence, and most neighbors barely noticed the bees. Frustrated, she took the feud online, accusing Arthur of running a dangerous insect operation in the neighborhood. That's just frustrating. A neighborhood dispute is one thing, but pushing a narrative after multiple official inspections completely clear the guy? That's not about safety anymore. It feels like a personal obsession. That evening, after a neighborhood block party, witnesses said Marcy entered Arthur's yard carrying a shovel. Around 6:45 p.m., with hundreds of bees still returning to the hives, she pried open a hive, struck it repeatedly, and kicked the stand over, exposing thousands of defensive honeybees. A massive cloud of bees instantly erupted. Marcy swatted at her face, panicked, and started running erratically in circles. Neighbors reported hearing frantic screaming. Then, a terrible situation got worse. Marcy tripped over a landscaping beam, falling hard onto her side. She desperately crawled across the gravel, but her frantic movements only attracted more bees. A neighbor called 911 almost immediately after seeing the damaged hive and the swarm forming around her. Deputies arrived minutes later and found Marcy struggling to breathe near the driveway. She was rushed to the hospital but died shortly after arrival. The medical examiner ruled her death anaphylaxis, a severe allergic reaction that caused her airway to swell shut. Security footage showed Marcy initiated the incident by trespassing and damaging the hive, so no charges were filed. Arthur later donated his equipment to a local school club and retired from beekeeping. A simple hobby ended because a neighborhood feud went too far. If someone spends months filing complaints and still isn't satisfied, you'd think they'd eventually take the hint, but the next case somehow managed to take that mindset to an entirely different level. It was August 19, 2017, at a busy farmer's market in San Jose. Families moved between produce stands while vendors served long lines beneath clear skies. Near the center of the market, staff kept a close eye on a customer whose disputes with several vendors had been escalating for months. And that customer was 44-year-old Tessa Corin Phillips, a wellness blogger known for reviewing local businesses and highlighting consumer safety concerns. And apparently, as her following grew, so did her confidence, and she became increasingly fixated on exposing vendors she personally disliked. For nearly a year, Tessa had fixated on a small Vietnamese food cart operated by 71-year-old Lynn Tran and her 22-year-old granddaughter Nina at the San Jose Farmers Market. She became convinced that the family was violating health regulations, despite repeated inspections that found no evidence of wrongdoing. According to reports I gathered, for whatever reason, she completely fixated on the Tran family. Most people would have moved on after the first few failed complaints. Tessa did the opposite. Every time inspectors cleared the cart, she became more determined to prove they had missed something. Tessa filed report after report with health inspectors and market managers, but every single inspection cleared the cart. When that didn't work, she started filming customers, confronting the vendors, and posting wild accusations online. Other vendors were actually warning security that her behavior was getting way too aggressive. That morning, Tessa had already been involved in 11 different documented confrontations with the family. She arrived with a new plan. Witnesses later said she told several people she intended to collect food samples herself because she no longer trusted the inspection process. Tessa walked straight toward the stand. Witnesses said she immediately began arguing with Lynn and Nina before reaching across the display and grabbing several packaged sandwiches. That single decision is what set everything else in motion. When Lynn stepped forward to stop her, Tessa actually shoved the 71-year-old grandmother backward, and that's where it crossed the line. Nina stepped between them, but Tessa punched her and grabbed her apron. The confrontation spilled into the cramped cooking area, where Nina backed against a work surface holding a pot of hot oil. Witnesses said Tessa kept advancing, so Nina grabbed the pot and swung it. The oil struck Tessa's face, neck, and mouth. She immediately let go, screaming and gasping for air as vendors rushed to help and security called 911. Paramedics arrived within minutes and transported her to a trauma center. Although the burns looked severe, the greater damage was inside her airway. The swelling continued to worsen, and Tessa died 2 days later from respiratory failure. The autopsy found second and third degree burns across her face, neck, and chest, but investigators determined the fatal injury was the extensive thermal damage inside her mouth, throat, and upper airway. Investigators reviewed witness statements, cell phone videos, and market records. The evidence showed Tessa initiated the confrontation and assaulted both Lynn and Nina, leading prosecutors to rule that Nina acted in self-defense. Lynn eventually returned to the market. Ironically, the inspection reports Tessa spent months attacking became part of the evidence that cleared the family. The market later expanded protections for vendors facing harassment. The crazy thing about Tessa is that she spent months building toward her downfall, while the next person manages to do it in less than a single traffic light cycle. It was September 14th, 2018, near a freeway interchange in Mesa, Arizona. Afternoon traffic crawled beneath intense desert heat as a lane closure backed vehicles toward an overpass. Construction barrels lined the roadway. Horns sounded across multiple lanes, and thousands of commuters were simply trying to get home. But two drivers in that line were about to let the heat and traffic completely ruin their lives. First, there was 46-year-old Claire Rosie Jones. Claire worked as an insurance sales manager and had a reputation for being fiercely competitive. Co-workers described her as the type of person who treated every disagreement like a contest she had to win. Several complaints had even been filed against her company over her aggressive driving. Then there was 38-year-old Jeffrey Blake, a construction foreman finishing a 12-hour shift in the Arizona heat. He was quiet, exhausted, and looking forward to getting home after spending the entire day managing a concrete crew beneath triple-digit temperatures. The trouble started when a lane closure forced traffic into a single merge point. We've all seen this happen, and honestly, it is one of my absolute biggest pet peeves on the road. You're sitting there waiting patiently in traffic, and then someone races down the closing lane, fully intending to cut everyone off at the last second. Well, that driver was Claire. She accelerated past the backed-up line and tried forcing her SUV into the gap directly ahead of Jeffrey's truck. Jeffrey refused to give way and kept moving with traffic. For most people, that would have been the end of it. For Claire, it was just the beginning. Traffic cameras later showed her tailgating Jeffrey through multiple intersections, leaning on her horn and gesturing angrily through the windshield. Several nearby drivers actually changed lanes to create distance because the confrontation was becoming obvious. Everything came to a head when traffic slowed near another merge point beside a center median. Claire pulled alongside Jeffrey, took out her phone and started filming him while shouting through her open window. Jeffrey ignored her and kept facing forward. When that failed to get a reaction, Claire opened her door and stepped into traffic carrying a large cup of hot coffee. A dash cam from a vehicle behind them captured the entire sequence. Claire walked directly to Jeffrey's truck. When he cracked the window open, she slapped the glass and threw the coffee through the opening. The liquid struck Jeffrey across the face, neck, and eyes. The reaction was immediate. Blinded and burned, Jeffrey threw open his door and stumbled out of the truck. Witnesses later said he appeared disoriented and was wiping at his eyes. Claire continued advancing toward him despite the traffic moving around them. Jeffrey extended both hands and shoved her backward to create space. It wasn't a punch or some dramatic tackle. It was just a quick, defensive push from someone who had literally just been assaulted. But the problem was where Claire was standing, just feet away from an active traffic lane with cars flying by at 40 miles an hour. She stumbled backward, lost her footing, and stepped right into the street. An oncoming delivery van struck Claire before the driver could react. Witnesses said the brakes locked up almost immediately, but there wasn't enough distance to avoid the collision. The impact threw her several feet onto the roadway. A witness called 911 while others rushed to help. Jeffrey, nearly blinded by the coffee, could only watch from nearby. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but Claire never regained consciousness. The medical examiner later ruled her death the result of catastrophic internal injuries and massive bleeding from the collision. Dashcam footage, traffic cameras, and witnesses showed Claire initiated the confrontation and entered traffic during the altercation. Prosecutors filed no charges, and the delivery van driver was cleared of wrongdoing. Jeffrey was treated for his burns and released that evening. The case became a stark reminder of how quickly road rage can turn fatal. Road rage at least gives people an excuse to blame traffic and heat, but the next case starts over something so small that it almost sounds made up. It was November 11th, 2016, rain-soaked downtown Minneapolis as people hurried inside restaurants and bars to escape the cold. A crowded bistro near the business district was packed for the dinner rush. Wet coats dripped onto the floor, and employees moved quickly between tables as conditions became increasingly slippery. That's when 39-year-old Erin Williams walked in. Now, to give you some background, Erin worked as a divorce mediator, meaning she literally dealt with conflict for a living. But in her personal life, friends said she was someone who absolutely hated being embarrassed and took any minor inconvenience as a personal insult. If she felt disrespected, she blew up. I think we've all seen this kind of customer. The one who takes a basic restaurant policy way too personally and turns a small inconvenience into a full-blown confrontation. For the staff working that night, it was probably the last thing they needed during an already busy dinner rush. On the other side was Samir Ali, the 34-year-old manager. Samir was a hard worker who had started as a dishwasher dishwasher a decade earlier and worked his way up. He also used to be a competitive college wrestler, so he was a big, strong guy. But his staff knew him for being incredibly calm and patient with difficult customers. The trouble started because Erin showed up 30 minutes late for her reservation. Per restaurant policy, they'd already given her table away to people who were actually there. The host tried to be nice, offering to put her on the priority wait list, but Erin just lost it. She started demanding a specific window table, insulting the staff, and loudly accusing the restaurant of playing favorites. It was causing a massive scene, so Samir stepped in to play peacemaker. He offered her the very next available table and threw in some free appetizers to smooth things over. But instead of cooling down, Erin got even worse. She pulled out her phone, started recording him, and followed him through the dining room, shoving the camera right in his face. Witnesses later said Samir tried to walk away from her. He turned toward the host stand to call building security, completely done with the situation, but Erin refused to let it go. She followed him through the dining room, still recording and demanding answers. Several customers later recalled her continuing to raise her voice as she closed the distance between them. When Samir suddenly turned around to face her, Erin visibly flinched and stumbled backward. The tile floor near the entrance was still slick from the rain. Her heel hit one of the wet patches, and her feet shot out from under her. Because the tables were packed so close together, she couldn't catch herself. The back of her head slammed full force into the sharp lower corner of a heavy wooden reservation podium. Witnesses later said they heard a horrific cracking sound. At first, people thought she'd simply been knocked out. Then blood began pooling on the tile. A doctor dining nearby rushed over as staff called 911. Paramedics arrived within minutes and transported her to a trauma center, but the skull fracture had already caused severe brain bleeding and swelling. Erin died the next morning. Investigators looked at the whole thing from every angle, including security cameras, witness statements, and Erin's own phone recording. The evidence showed that Erin had aggressively pursued and confronted staff. Despite repeated attempts to de-escalate the situation, prosecutors ultimately declined to file charges, determining that her fatal injuries resulted from the accidental fall rather than any intentional act by Samir. Even though he was cleared of wrongdoing, Samir's life was still upended. The restaurant fired him anyway, citing a strict zero-tolerance policy for customer altercations. Management also replaced the heavy wooden podium with a rounded metal one and changed how staff managed wet floors during rainy weather. I think what bothers me most about Erin's story is how one bad decision snowballed into something nobody could stop. But as tragic as that was, this next Karen didn't even have to leave her chair to completely wreck her own life. It was May 6, 2016 in Phoenix, Arizona. Afternoon temperatures pushed past 100 degrees as traffic crawled along Camelback Road. Inside a small real estate office, the air conditioner struggled against the heat. Phones rang steadily, paperwork covered desks, and employees worked through another busy Friday before the weekend. Inside was 48-year-old Claudia Moore, a real estate agent who had spent 13 years selling homes around the Phoenix area. Most of her clients liked her and had no major complaints, but from what I could tell, her co-workers saw a different side of her. Claudia wasn't the type of person who handled frustration very well. When a deal fell apart or something didn't go her way, she usually felt like somebody else had to be responsible for it. That Friday, the thing that pushed her over the edge was a $12 processing fee attached to one of her transactions. And I know that sounds ridiculous because we're talking about $12. But honestly, it wasn't really about the money. It was about timing. Two listings were already struggling. A client was questioning her commission, and management was putting pressure on agents over declining reviews. So by the time Claudia saw that charge, she was already in a bad mood and looking for someone to take it out on. Looking for someone to blame, Claudia called customer support. The call connected her with 27-year-old Lonnie Cruz, a customer service representative working from a call center. Lonnie had built a reputation for handling difficult customers without losing her composure. Outside work, she ran a small consumer rights social media page where she discussed customer service issues and documented abusive behavior faced by retail and call center employees. What Claudia didn't know was that Lonnie wasn't just another customer service representative. She regularly helped train new employees on handling hostile callers and had spent years documenting abusive interactions for awareness campaigns and workplace training programs. When difficult customers tried intimidation tactics, Lonnie knew exactly how to preserve records, follow policy, and protect herself. The conversation quickly turned ugly. According to call logs later reviewed by investigators, Claudia mocked Lonnie's accent, demanded supervisors, threatened to get her fired, and launched into personal insults. Lonnie followed company policy, documented the abuse, and ended the call. For most customer service workers, that would have been the end of it. For Lonnie, documenting these encounters was practically second nature. After removing any identifying information, she later shared portions of the interaction as an example of workplace abuse, something she had done many times before without incident. The video probably would have disappeared after a few hundred views. Instead, Claudia found it. Rather than walking away, she decided to go after the one person who had carefully documented every step of the interaction. She began flooding the comments, accusing Lonnie of misconduct, demanding the post be removed, and insisting she could prove her side of the story. She started commenting from her public real estate account. She uploaded screenshots from the actual dispute, argued with viewers, insulted strangers, and repeatedly tried to defend her behavior. Without realizing it, she provided enough information for people to connect the story directly to her. By Saturday morning, local real estate groups were sharing screenshots of her comments. Former clients recognized her name, and the brokerage began receiving complaints. Claudia had picked the wrong person to target. Lonnie didn't get rattled or lose evidence. Documenting abusive customers was something she'd done for years, and every accusation Claudia made was met with records, timestamps, and documentation Lonnie had already preserved. What really stands out for me is that Lonnie never identified Claudia, never named the company, and never encouraged anyone to contact the brokerage. Instead, viewers connected the dots themselves using information Claudia voluntarily posted from her own public account. So, the more she argued, uploaded screenshots, and defended herself, the more she revealed about who she was. Security footage showed Claudia spending the day glued to her phone as clients began canceling appointments and management launched a review. Co-workers noticed her clutching her chest, but she brushed it off. Around 2:40 p.m., while arguing on a call with her manager, she became short of breath, staggered, and collapsed beside her desk. Employees called 911 and began CPR, but she died shortly afterward. The medical examiner determined she suffered a heart attack triggered by extreme stress, worsened by undiagnosed coronary artery disease. Investigators later found her computer still open to the comment thread that started the controversy. Afterward, the brokerage introduced new social media and employee conduct policies. Several clients who had considered leaving ultimately stayed after the brokerage publicly addressed the incident and implemented the new policies. What began as a $12 fee turned into a battle with the worst possible person Claudia could have targeted. If you ask me, the moment she decided to go after Lonnie, she was already fighting a losing battle. Lonnie knew how to handle abusive customers, preserve evidence, and stay completely within the rules. The harder Claudia pushed, the stronger the case against her became. By the end, she had damaged her career, sparked a public controversy, and lost her life fighting a battle she never had a chance to win.